Hello everyone, and welcome to the Web Development Foundations Bootcamp. In this one, you're going to be learning the fundamentals of web development, which will take you from zero to a level where you'll be comfortable enough to build web applications. For this bootcamp, you'll be learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML will focus on the structure of the web page, while CSS will deal with the styling, and JavaScript would focus on interactions. Not to worry if this sounds intimidating, we'll be learning step by step, so I'll cover the foundational knowledge of each technology we'll be covering. This is what we'll be learning over the next 7 weeks. For week 1, we'll focus on HTML, which is the building block of web pages. Then in week 2, we'll focus on CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This is used to add styling and to make our pages visually appealing. Then in week 3, we'll dive into building layouts, which is going to cover more complex topics in CSS. And the 3 main topics we'll cover would be Flexbox, grid layouts, and responsive web design. Then in the 4th week, we'll be diving into JavaScript fundamentals. We'll cover the basic knowledge of JavaScript, which is used to add interaction to web pages, and more. Then in week 5, we'll dive deeper into more JavaScript, and you also get introduced into Git and GitHub, which is a version control system. And in week 6, we'll dive into Document Object Model, which is kind of like a representation of our HTML page in JavaScript. With this, we can get elements from the HTML page and add interactivity or affect the page. Finally, in week 7, we'll dive into more complex topics, which are JSON, AJAX, and working with external APIs. Throughout the course of this bootcamp, you'll have various assignments at the end of each week and also a capstone project. As with any bootcamp, there are definitely some prerequisites, but for web development foundations, you don't need much. First, you have an interest in programming and software development. This is essential as you have to be interested in what you want to learn. You should be proficient in computer operations, so you should be very comfortable working with computers. Next, you should enjoy solving problems and be comfortable with challenges. Let's face it, the whole idea behind software development is to solve problems, but in this case, we are using computer language to solve these problems. So, you should be very comfortable with solving problems and challenges. Next, you should have a correct mindset about software engineering. You should be entering this field for the right reasons. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme, as it involves time and commitment. So, if you enter software development with a mindset that you're going to get a 6-figure job at the end of 3 months or 2 months, this bootcamp is not for you. And finally, patience. Software development is a journey, and you have to trust the process. Sometimes you might be stuck with some problems that might take a while to solve, so you would need patience and you also need to trust the process because it takes time to build this knowledge. The lesson structure for this bootcamp is straightforward. So, at the start of every lesson, we'll have a 5 to 10 minutes introduction where you'll have the agenda of the topic being covered today, and we'll also have a brief overview of the previous topic covered. After that, we'll dive into the live demo, which is going to last about 1 hour to 1 hour 30 minutes. This would involve the coding session where I'll be coding and covering some concepts. After the demo, we'll have a closing section where I'll summarize all the whole topics covered, and this is an opportunity for you to ask questions, and you do this in the comment section. After that would be the next step, which is the topic will be covered in the next lesson. And if there are assignments, this is where I'll also introduce you to them. This bootcamp is all about web development, and it is important we have to know how the web works. I'll just be giving you a high-level overview of how the web works. Now, whenever you visit a website on your browser, that browser is called the client. If, for example, you type in www.facebook.com, then press send, that single action makes a request to the server. Now, the server is simply a computer somewhere on the internet where the information of www.facebook.com resides. When the server receives the request, it does some processing, then it sends back the response. The response in this case would be the home page of facebook.com, but if you're logged in, it returns the Facebook feed. On the server side, a lot of things happen, but I'm not going to be diving deep into the inner workings. But the first thing I should point out is, behind the scenes, when you type in www.facebook.com and send it to the server on the internet receives that request, but it does some processing. Now, the actual address of Facebook isn't facebook.com. Now, on the internet, devices and computers are identified using Internet Protocol addresses, which is also known as IP address. But IP addresses are a series of numbers, and you as the end user might not be able to remember everything. How can you remember the IP address of facebook.com, instagram.com, and a bunch of other websites? So, let's say the IP address is just like a phone number. On your phone, when you have a phone number, you store it with a corresponding name because you can't remember every number of everybody on your phone. Now, for the internet, we use something called domain name system. So the domain name system is kind of like your phone book, which is responsible for resolving IP addresses from their domain names. So facebook.com is a domain name, while behind the scenes, it has a corresponding IP address. You'll see a simple example of this shortly. For today's lesson, we'll be covering the HTML file structure. You'll get to understand how HTML web pages are structured. After that, we'll also cover common HTML elements, then we'll talk about links and creating multi-page websites. By the way, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is just a language that helps you represent visual elements on your web page. Alright, let's get into the demo. I've created a folder on my desktop named Web Development Foundation Bootcamp. I'll open it up and go to week 1, then lesson 1. I'll open this up in a code editor. And for this bootcamp, we'll be using Visual Studio Code as our code editor. So head over to code.visualstudio.com, download it and install it if you haven't. I'll open up mine now. Then I'll drag in the folder into it. Inside the lesson 1 folder, the first thing we're going to be doing is to create a HTML file. Let me zoom in. So I'll click on the plus button here, which is going to be add a new file action. Then I'll name the file index.html. I'd also reveal to you why I named this file index.html shortly. The first thing we're going to be doing is to create the basic structure or basic skeleton of a HTML page. For this, Visual Studio Code has an inbuilt program that helps you create the basic structure. So you just type in the exclamation mark, and you can see over here, Emmet abbreviation. So Emmet helps you with common code snippets, so you don't have to write them from scratch all the time. So when I type this, I either click on this or I press enter. This is the basic structure of a HTML page. Remember what I said. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is the language responsible for creating contents of a web page. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is to break down the entire structure of this generated code. Not to worry if this looks intimidating. I'll take it step by step, as this is a beginner bootcamp. The first line contains the doc type. Now, doc type simply stands for document type. And this is self-explanatory. What is the document type of this file? HTML. As simple as that. Now, back in the days, doc type used to contain links to rules for HTML files to follow. But now, this line is just needed to make the HTML file valid. Currently, we're working with HTML5 and above, and this is the document type for HTML5 and above. Like I mentioned, in earlier days, doc types used to have some more complicated stuff, like links to rules that the HTML file should follow. So, enough of that. Now, HTML employs something called nesting. As you can see, the root element or the root tag is called HTML. So, you have the HTML opening and the closing tag. So, for the opening tag, you just have HTML, and this is an attribute. I'll explain this as we progress, but this simply states this is a HTML tag and the language is what? English. So for the opening tag, we have left and right angled brace or the greater and less than sign. Then inside it, we have the tag name. While for the closing tag, we have a / before the tag name. This is to show that this is the closing of the tag. And if you think about it, this is self-explanatory as this is a HTML document, so the root element should be a HTML tag. So every content or everything in our web page is going to be contained inside this HTML tag. And you can see this from the indentation. So this tag or this element has two children. The first child is the head element or head tag. I'm going to explain the difference between the element and tag shortly. So the HTML element has two children. The first one is the head element and the second one is the body element. Now, the head element contains configuration information and extra information about the web page, while the body element contains what you'll be seeing in your web page. Before I cover what the head tag and all the stuff inside it is all about, let's talk about the body. So the body is simply the visual page you're going to be seeing in your browser. So inside here, you can see what I mentioned about the opening tag and the closing tag. So this shows the start of the body region and this shows the end of the body region. And you get to know that by the / before the body tag. So inside here is where I create something like content. So the first content I'll just add will be welcome to the Bootcamp. Then I'll save this. So I'll open this up inside of Google Chrome. I'll just simply hold this and drag this into Google Chrome. I'm going to be showing you an alternate way to run this as we progress. This page simply says, welcome to the Bootcamp. As simple as that. So if you notice, we don't see any other of the content of this HTML file inside the web browser. Instead, we only see welcome to the Bootcamp because it is contained inside the body tag. So, and that is what we have over here. I can add more content, save this, I come to the browser and reload, and it automatically adds that to the web page. Let's get back and break down what the head tag contains. Now, I'm going to be making this lesson very interactive, even though it is not a live lesson. And here goes my first question. How many children does the head tag contain? Or how many children does the head element contain? If you said 3, then you're correct. The head element contains 2 meta elements and 1 title element. Before we talk about the meta elements, let's talk about the title. I want you to take a look at this. The title has its content, document, and if you look at the web page over here, this is the same title of the web page. So this is what you get to see when you visit a site like facebook.com. You can see, if you expand this, the title of this web page is Facebook login or sign up, while the title of ours is document. This is not really descriptive, so let's change that up. So I'll head back to my web page and my HTML file and say, welcome to HTML. Then I'll save it. I'll come back to the browser and refresh. And if you look at it once again, we have welcome to HTML. So that is the function of the title element. And I want you to notice something. I'm using the word element and tags interchangeably. Not to worry, I'll explain the differences shortly. Now, another member of the head tag or another child of the head tag is the meta tag. And meta, which is the short form for metadata, simply gives more information and configuration of the web page. So with this, you can do more configurations. So the first meta tag has an attribute called char set, which stands for character set. And we set the character set to UTF-8. And UTF-8 contains most characters of human written languages such as English, French, Spanish, and even Japanese. So in here, we're trying to say this HTML document should be using UTF-8 so it can accommodate both the Japanese language, English language, and also French language. And language here simply means the symbols. So for English, you have the alphabets and like exclamation marks. Then for Japanese, this web page should also accommodate Japanese or Cantonese symbols, all thanks to the UTF-8 character encoding. Not to worry about this. As you progress in your web development journey, you get a better understanding of what all this means. The next meta tag or the next meta element is the one for the viewport configuration. So this meta element has the name attributes, and this time around we are configuring the viewport. Now, the viewport is the visible area of our web page. In this case, the viewport is going to be the whole of this web page. That is starting from this point and going down to this point. So now, what do we want to do to the viewpoint? We want to set the content. In this case, we're saying the width should be the device width. That means the width of this web page should be the device width. And you can see this web page is currently the device width, and if we make it bigger, it still maintains the device width. And here we now say the initial scale should be 1.0. And this initial scale simply means the zoom level when the page is loaded. Now it is set to 1.0 and that is the default value. So it is kind of like redundant. So if we remove this, if we remove this particular point, everything should still work. Now you might seem a little bit confused, like, okay, what does this actually do? So let's head over to our web page. I'm going to be opening something called the developer console. So I right click on inspect, and this is the developer console. We'll be working with this as we progress in this bootcamp. The developer console just gives you extra information about your web page and also different ways to interact with the web page on the browser. So for this, I'm going to click on this icon over here, which is the toggle device toolbar. So I'm going to be changing this to the mobile view. And you can see this kind of like simulates a mobile device. If I click on this, you can see different mobile devices. But the main reason I'm bringing this up is to show you the relevance of this particular meta tag. I know I'm not diving into the practicals, but I just want to give you an understanding of how things work in a HTML file. So we have this, and you can see for a mobile device, there are no scroll bars because the width of the web page is the same width as the device. But watch what happens when we comment this out or when we remove this line. Now, to comment this out, I'm going to be talking about comments shortly, but to comment this out, you click on the line and you hold down Command and /. On the Windows machine, this should be Control and /. Then I click Save. I come back to the browser, I refresh, and I want you to notice something. Can you see we have horizontal scroll bars? The web page is not zoomed to fit the width of the page. And you can see this is not really cool for mobile devices. You can see that we just have this short text, but we have scroll bars everywhere. So this is just used to make our web pages accessible on mobile devices. So that is what this line is used for. So if you happen to be in an interview and you get asked, why do we have this viewport configuration in our HTML document, you know the answer. So I'll uncomment that back and refresh, and we have everything working back as normal without the scroll bars. I'll click on this toggle, click on developer console, and let's get back to our web page. Now, if you notice, when I commented this out, commenting out stuff in programming generally just kind of like excludes that part of the code from running. So in this case, it excludes it from running on the browser. But if you're working with a programming language, maybe like Python or Java, it is going to exclude that part of the code from compiling. So I'll undo this. Now, there are more elements that can be contained inside the head session. And in case some of these explanations are not making sense to you, Visual Studio is a very intelligent code editor, which is now kind of like an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. So almost every thing you do in Visual Studio has some interactive information. So if I hover over the head elements, you can see we have an explanation for it. The head elements represents a collection of metadata for the document. And these are the metadata. Now, there are some of the metadata that are named. For example, title. This is common because we know that every web page should have a title. In this case, welcome to HTML. While these meta tags you see here are for miscellaneous metadata, that is, configuration information that are not specific enough. So the designers of HTML give us the option of adding this extra configuration information for the ones that are not defined, like the title element. So let's continue with the body, since this is the main place we're going to be working with in our HTML file. Now, we have welcome to the Bootcamp currently in our body, and this is what is displayed inside of the browser. I think, let me zoom this, if you can see it clearly. But if you notice, in web pages, there are different elements. But right now, we just have this text inside the body element. So let's head to a site like Facebook, for instance. On Facebook, you can see we have different types of elements on the web page. We have this form, we have this button, we have this link, we have this image, and we also have this text. If you look at our documents right now, we're just putting this welcome to the Bootcamp directly inside the body. But that is not how HTML works. HTML provides you with different elements that is used to serve different purposes. For instance, the element for this image is different from the element from this text, is also different from the element for this text areas and also this button. So right now, I'll be covering common HTML elements. The first one we're going to be starting with is the text element. There are different types of text that can be represented on a web page. As you can see from the Visual Studio Code website, this text is different from this text and also different from this text. So this looks like the title or heading of the page. So the first text element we'll be covering is the heading element. So let's head back to our code editor, and to create the elements in Visual Studio Code, you remember what I told you, you have the left angle brace, then the H1, then the right angle brace, and automatically Visual Studio Code saves this for us. Inside this, we can now type in welcome to the Bootcamp, and we'll save our work. And when I save, I go over here and reload. Automatically, you can see that this text is bigger, which kind of like mimics the one on the Visual Studio Code's website. So for representing stuffs on the web page, HTML provides us with different types of elements, and this one we're currently covering is the heading element. But if you notice, there are different headings in different websites. You can see this looks like a heading, and also this kind of like looks like a subheading. So HTML provides us with different variations of heading elements. So I'm just going to change this to H2, H3, and it goes up to H6. Then I save. I'd also come over here and reload in the browser, and you can see the different sizes of the heading elements. And I know you might be thinking, why is it that every time I make a change here, I always come over to the browser and reload? That doesn't really look like an efficient workflow. Not to worry, I'll show you how to implement a reload on save action. Now, back to the heading. As you can see, for every web page, there are different hierarchies or different heading sizes. So you can see H1 simply stands for the biggest heading in a web page, which could be the most prominent heading. Then we have this up until H6. So H1 simply means the biggest, H2 second biggest, H3 third biggest, down onto H6. So depending on your use case scenario, you have different types of headings. Now, let's quickly fix the issue of always saving whenever we make a change. Right now, we're running this index.html page directly on the browser. As you can see, it is being run from the file system. So there is no way for the browser to know that you've made a change inside your code editor simply because they are not connected. So right now, I want to connect Visual Studio Code to the browser so that whenever I make changes on my HTML file, it will reflect automatically in the browser. Now, Visual Studio Code provides us with something called an extension or extensions. And extensions simply just adds additional features into our code editor because let's face it, Visual Studio Code cannot know what every developer in the whole world needs and build those features into them. Instead, they provided us an outlet called extensions, which helps developers around the world create additional features to further improve the workflow of Visual Studio Code. Now, you can see I already have some extensions installed. But the one we're going to be focusing on is the Live Server extension. Also, I'm still going to be talking about this Prettier code formatter, but let's just focus on Live Server. I don't want to complicate this. Now, as the name suggests, it launches a development local server with live reload. So the actual feature, let me push this back. Okay, push this back one more time. So the actual feature we want with Live Server is what? The live reload feature for static and dynamic pages. We'll still be talking about static. Currently, we're working with static pages. As we progress, I'll talk about dynamic pages, but we won't be covering that in this bootcamp. So we want the live reload feature, which is whenever we make a change on this HTML file, it automatically reloads the browser. So you go over here to the extensions tab in Visual Studio Code, then you search for Live Server. I already have it installed, but what if you go here, you search for Live Server and you click on install. Once it installs, you're good to go. I already have Live Server installed, so I'll close that up and head over to this place. Then I'll say right click, open with Live Server. Now, this automatically opens up the web page on your default browser. So I can always go and cancel this, and you can see Live Server is currently running on. When you just see this, it means that Live Server is currently running, and you can click on this to close. Now, what is the actual magic going on here? The first thing I just want to show you, let me just change this and watch and see. Immediately I save this work. Voila, it automatically updates on the browser. So I don't always have to go over here and click the reload button. One thing about software development is that as you progress, there are lots of repetitive tasks that you have to find a way to kind of like automate it to make your workflow efficient. And having this live reload feature is one of them. So right now, I don't always have to come and click on the reload button whenever I make a change in my web document. Now, I want you to notice something. This is the previous file we've been working on, which shows us the absolute path to the index.html file. And now this is Live Server. Question time. I'm going to be switching between the two web pages that are open, and I want you to point out the differences. I'm not going to tell you where to look, but I just want to see if you are observant. If you noticed that the URL or the link in the address bar is different, then that's a good one. Right now, for the local file, we have the link to the actual file, which is contained in our file system over here. But for the one hosted with Live Server, we have some random bunch of numbers over here, and we now have index.html, which shows that we are actually opening that index.html file just like we have in the local version. Now, the cool stuff about Live Server is that it launches a local server on our computer. Remember when I mentioned the client-server relationship between you on the client side, which is the browser, and the server, which is somewhere on the internet. That is exactly what Live Server does. Live Server kind of like simulates as if your web page is hosted on the internet, but this time around, it is hosted locally. And now, if you recollect the analogy I presented earlier, where I said there's something called a domain name system, which is kind of like the phone book on the internet. So your IP address is kind of like, which is this stuff, is kind of like the phone number. Then it also has a domain name. And the example I gave was facebook.com. So you see web.facebook.com is actually a domain name. But behind the scenes, it has an IP address. Now, the reason why the whole domain name system was created was that, as you can see from this example, this states 127.0.0.1. This is the IP address of my local system. Now, if you had like, imagine if there was nothing like domain names. This is a little bit of networking, which is essential for web development because let's face it, you're creating a website and a website is hosted on the internet and internet is just a network of networks. So you also have to have a little bit knowledge of networking. So this is kind of like basic networking we're also covering over here. So back to the explanation. Imagine if there was nothing like a domain name or a domain name system where you have like user-friendly names for IP addresses or user-friendly names for devices on the internet. You would have to memorize different IP address of different websites. So imagine Facebook IP address was 198.0.0.127. Then you have Instagram's IP address as 192.1.1.270. And you also have Alibaba.com, or you have NewYorkTimes.com, or you have Amazon.com as 138.2.2.1. As a human being, you wouldn't be able to store all this information. You'd have kind of like a cognitive overload and you'd always be forgetting these IP addresses. So the domain name system gives us a way of creating domain names which are user-friendly names for IP address. So back to the phone book example. So instead of memorizing Kelvin's phone number or John's phone number, which could be +234 122, instead on your phone book on your smartphone, you have John, and the corresponding number for John could be 081223. You get the idea. So over here, we have this IP address. And remember what I told you about IP addresses and domain name system. We have 127.0.1. So Live Server kind of like simulates that this website is being hosted on a server. And now you could be asking, because I want you as you progress in this bootcamp, whenever I explain something, always have a jotter and a pen by the side. If you have any question, just write it down so you don't get to forget. Sometimes, as over the course of the lesson, I might come back and explain some of all those points, and if I miss that, then you can always ask in the comment section. Now, if you've asked yourself like, okay, you're talking about domain names and these user-friendly names instead of the IP addresses, then why does Live Server give us this IP address? What about if I forget it? If you thought about that, that's a good one. Now, the corresponding domain name for any website hosted on your local system. Remember, if you go to Live Server, it says launches a development local server. So whenever you're creating a website, you're actually working on a local system. You don't get to work on the internet directly. So the corresponding domain name for this local hosted IP address is what? Okay, let me just copy that. Let me copy, paste. So this is the same thing. So the local or the domain name for any local server hosted on your computer is called what? Local host. So if I click local host and I press enter, voila, the same thing. So you can see here, this is the IP address version of our web page, and this is what the domain name version of our web page. So if you don't always want to memorize 127.0.0.1, you can always come over here and type in localhost. So instead of Facebook's 198.0.0.2, you just type web.facebook.com. Over here, we just type localhost. So this is the domain name for any web page hosted on our local system. Now, the next point in this part is also, because I want you to be very curious and inquisitive as you follow this bootcamp. Always have questions. I'm going to be there to answer them in the comment section for the next couple of months, hopefully. So now you might be saying, okay, this is the IP address. Then what about this colon and this 5500 stuff? What's that all about? Okay, this is called the port number. Now, before you get confused or like fed up and saying web development is not for me, not to worry. This is very simple. Now, remember what I told you about IP addresses, which is Internet Protocol addresses. I told you that they are addresses or they are used to identify devices on the internet. So, if this is the identity of my local device, which is my computer or my laptop I'm currently using to record this course, then this stuff is also going to be a port. Now, using the computer analogy right here, in your laptop, you have different ports for different devices, right? You have your USB ports, your HDMI ports, your charging ports, and so on and so forth. So, for my local computer, 5500 is the port I'm going to be using to connect to this web page. Now, when this port has been taken, another service I'm going to be creating from my computer cannot have access to this port because it is already taken. Now, take a deep breath. If you have a USB device connected to one of your USB ports on your laptop, can you connect another USB device to that same port? The answer is no. So the whole network configuration of a device gives us access to multiple ports in our device. So currently, 5500 is the available ports that this web server connects to. If I create another web page, a different web page in a different folder, and I create live server and I try to host that different web page with the same port 5500, it is not going to work. You'd have an error or something. Do you get the whole idea? So with this, we have the flexibility of creating multiple services on our web server. So for example, now this is a web page with this port. I can also create a back-end server. So now this is everything on the front end. I could create a back-end server, which means the server could have a database still hosted on my local system, but that back-end server will connect to another port, or would connect, let me use the USB, would connect to another USB port. You get the idea? And I can also create a chat application which is going to connect to another port. So now for the front end, we have port 5500. For the back end, which is going to contain the database, we could have port 7000. Now for the chat server, we could have port 5000. You get the whole idea. You don't need to understand everything at once. Over time, with repetition and me reviewing these topics as we progress, you'll get a good hang of this. And I'll also provide supplementary reading materials in the description. So, let's continue. So in a nutshell, like I said, live server, kind of like the main reason we installed this is just for live reload, so that whenever I make any change on the HTML file, like I remove coolest, watch this place, I remove coolest and I save, automatically it updates without having to come to manually reload the web browser. And I also made mention about the domain name server, which helps us kind of like fetch the corresponding IP address of any domain name. So I've given you the IP address version of our local server, and I've also given you the domain name version of our local server. And I also explained what these port stuff are. This is networking. You should have basic knowledge of all this, and you don't have to have it before this course, as I'm going to be explaining the essentials, and I'll also reveal more knowledge as time goes on. So enough of networking, and let's continue. So now you already have the header elements. The next elements we're going to be talking about is the paragraph elements. Okay, I mentioned I was going to explain the difference between elements and tag. So right now, this whole stuff is the H1 element. The HTML consists of the opening tag, the closing tag, and the contents. Altogether, this is called an element. In this case, the H1 element. Now, this H1 stuff is called the H1 tag. This is H2 tag. This is, if you want to mention the left angled brace and the right angled brace, you call it the H2 tag. Or sorry, you call it the opening tag. This is the closing tag. Together, this is the H2 element. Some elements can also have attributes. So attributes kind of like give extra information or kind of like configures the elements. So you can see in this case, HTML tag over here has the lang attributes. So we are adding additional information, or we are configuring that this HTML tag should have the lang attributes set to what? English. We can set this to Espanol or Chinese or anything. Same thing for this meta. This is the tag attributes, altogether the elements, the meta elements. And sometimes you can also have self-closing tag. You can see this meta element. It does not have any content. In this case, it has a self-closing tag, but the H1 has content in between, so it does not have a self-closing tag. Instead, it has an opening tag and a closing tag. As we progress, I'll show you more examples. Now, the next text element we're going to be covering is the paragraph element or the paragraph tag. Now you know the difference. So this is what? Opening tag, closing paragraph tag. Then inside we have the contents, some cool contents. Once again, opening tag, closing tag, contents. All together is called the paragraph element. Individually, you say the paragraph tag. Cool. So let's save this. And you can see it's quite different. So paragraph is kind of like the body of the web page. So we already have H1 to H6. These are just used for titles. So paragraph is kind of like, let me do something. In Visual Studio Code, there's something called lorem. That's lorem ipsum. That's kind of like dummy text. So if I don't want to think of what to type, I'm thinking of, oh, I don't know what to type. I just simply come back here and just type lorem and press enter. Remember, Emmet kind of like helps with abbreviations. So I just type in lorem and press enter, and automatically it generates for me some bunch of random text. So paragraph text, paragraph elements are just used for representing the body of a HTML page. So let me select this and comment it out by hitting Command and forward / and save. Can you see? So welcome to the Bootcamp. Then you have some description here. I can also put H2. And also put lorem. I can also specify how long I want it to be. So I can say lorem 20. And you can see. So you can see the visual hierarchy of a web page. So you always have, depending on the type of web page, you always have the header or the heading as the kind of like topmost priority element in the web page, kind of like a title to introduce it. You have paragraph for content. You can also have subheading, in this case H2. You can see the hierarchy. So H1 is the biggest, H2 is the second biggest, and you can see the hierarchy over here. Then you can always have paragraphs which are used for the content of the website. So if we head over to Visual Studio Code's website, if I right click and press inspect, this is going to open the DevTools on Brave browser. It's still the same for Chrome. So you can see over here, can you see? Code faster with AI. You can see it is a H1 tag. Can I zoom in? Okay, I can zoom in. Can you see H1, code faster with AI? Because this is the most prominent text of the web page. So everything we are doing right now is going to be translated, is going to be giving you the foundational knowledge to be able to build any web page. So at the end of this, let me see. At the end of this bootcamp, building this type of web page will be very easy, I assure you. Not to be very easy, it will be doable. I don't want to overpromise. So let's also scroll down. Let me see. Where can we see a paragraph? You can see this is another heading. This could be H2 or H3, but I want to focus on this. So I right click and click on inspect. And I guessed correctly. I want you to take a look at this. Can you see? In any language is actually a H2 element. Then we also now have the paragraph. Are you seeing that everything, if you take a look at this part and take a look at this section of our web page, can you see it's quite similar? So you don't always have to rush your development journey. You always have to learn the basics, always have to learn the foundations, because that is the essential part of building any knowledge. You don't have to skip and be in a hurry to want to learn how to use React or Tailwind CSS or all this kind of stuff. This is the foundational knowledge you need to progress. So without even looking at the source code, to be sincere, I've never looked at the source code. I just used my knowledge to know that this is a H1 and this should be maybe, I don't know, H2 or paragraph, depending on the web developer's decision. Then I also came here, I said that this is likely going to be H2. And if you look at the code, it is H2. And I also said that this was going to be paragraph. So headings are used for titles, paragraphs are used for body and content of the web page. That is the basic explanation of that. Let me also go, okay. So let's tackle the next part. And I want you to notice something too. One thing about paragraphs, although when we get to CSS, we're going to be diving deeper into that. So paragraphs now are called block elements. So what that means is that if I copy and paste this paragraph, you can see it comes to the next line. Paragraphs kind of like whenever you have a paragraph, it comes to the next line. This is also relatable to the real world scenario. Whenever, like in English writing, a paragraph is always introduced on a new line. So what block element simply means is that it takes up the whole line of the web page. So this is the second paragraph. It doesn't continue from here. It takes up the whole line. So that is just one point I want to mention. And also remember the whole idea about nesting. When I started this lesson, I mentioned that HTML is built on the foundation or the core principle of nesting elements. You can see the HTML here is the root element, and inside it we have the head and the body, which are the two main children. The head is for configuration information, while the body is for the visual part of the web page. Now, inside this body we have the H1, we also have the paragraph, and so on and so forth. Now, inside this graph tag, we can also have other elements. So one very good example would be, imagine sometimes you have in a web page, can I see Facebook? You see Facebook like this, you see this part, create a page, has this bold styling. All of them are one paragraph, but in case you want to kind of like make some part of the paragraph bold or probably italicize it, you could, HTML provides us with tags that can do that. So for this, let's go back to our web page. For this, I could wrap this particular word with another element named strong. This is the opening. And remember what I told you about the closing. Left square angled brace / then you have the other word. Visual Studio Code helps us to complete that. So watch what happens if I click on save. and immediately you can see this word is already bold. The same thing we can also have. So now this strong element is called an inline element because you can simply put it in line in any part of your HTML document. So you can see it is inline this paragraph. It is inline this paragraph. But you can see this other paragraph now. It cannot be nested inside another paragraph. They kind of like stand on their own, which means they are block elements. Now, I want you to be curious as always. I want you to ask yourself, okay, I just said that I could have inline elements and HTML is based on the concept of nesting. And I clearly stated here that paragraphs are block elements, which means they cover the whole entire line. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I nest a paragraph inside another one? That is, if I'm trying to force a paragraph to be inline. So let me cut out this paragraph and add it somewhere here and save. And you can see immediately something goes wrong in our web editor. If you're observant, I want you to look down. You can see over here, we have this red, which means it is an error. And this error was picked up by something called Prettier. So let's click on it. And whenever you see stuff like this, don't be intimidated. Let me make this smaller. Okay. So first things would be to clear the output, then save the work for the error to be regenerated. So already Prettier, which is used for formatting HTML documents, gives us this error. Just hold on because I'll show you how to install this Prettier and configure it right now. But with every development experience, you always have to have tools that makes life easy for you. For example, you know how we generated this page using Emmet, which helped us generate the base skeleton of a HTML file. And remember how we also installed Live Server, which helped us automatically reload our web page whenever we make changes. Now, we also have Prettier, which helps us report errors that has to do with the formatting of our documents. You can see right now, all these are developer tools that makes development experience easier. Already, I know the problem is a paragraph can be nested inside another paragraph, and Prettier, which I've installed, automatically lets me know about this. But let's see if the developer tools, before I explain this, let's see if the developer tools report this error. So I right click, inspect, and I go to console and nothing. Okay. So for this error that you can see here, that is pretty intimidating, you can see that it has to do with the formatting. And let's scroll. Can you see? Whenever you have this error, most of the times, you just start scrolling up. Don't be intimidated by this. I'm not a genius, do you get? Don't be intimidated by this. You just have to calm down and read the error. And you can see over here, as I scroll to the top, I saw something over here. It says syntax error. Syntax, which means syntax is kind of like the format. Do you get the format of the HTML or the format of the programming language or the markup language? It says here, unexpected closing p tag. It may happen when the tag has already been closed by another tag. Do you get what I mean? So it says here, for more information, click on this link, blah, blah, blah. But here, it is already showing you where the error is. So the error simply states that unexpected closing p tag, which is the paragraph tag. So if you look at this part, you can see the opening tag. Remember what I told you about tags? You have the opening and the closing tag. So over here, you have the opening paragraph tag. You have another opening paragraph tag. That looks like a problem. But Prettier doesn't complain because it knows that you can nest HTML elements inside another, just like how we nested this strong tag over here. So back to this. we have the opening paragraph tag. We have another opening paragraph tag. Okay, Prettier doesn't complain since we can have nested. Then it now comes here. It has the first closing paragraph tag. It doesn't still complain that, okay, so probably this is the opening paragraph tag and also the closing paragraph tag. Then the program execution keeps going. Then all of a sudden, Prettier sees another closing paragraph tag and it is now confused. Not really confused, it now checks what is the rule of HTML. A paragraph cannot have another paragraph inside it. And one way to know this is that you can't have two consecutive closing paragraph tag. So at this point, Prettier complains and said, unexpected closing tag P. A lot of tutorials on YouTube don't cover this type of information, but the approach I'm going to use in this bootcamp is to break down everything so that you don't kind of like don't know what is working behind the scenes or kind of like just guess your way through your development journey. I want you to have this solid understanding of how things are, because this little stuff like this might take up to 30 minutes to debug if you don't know the rules of HTML. So I'm going to be covering the rules of HTML before you start designing superb sites like this. I know you want to design stuffs like this, but you just have to calm down and focus on the fundamentals. So this is proof that you can't have nested paragraphs. The same thing with H1 for these heading tags. If you nest it inside another one, you also have this problem because remember, if we uncomment this, heading tags are also block elements because they appear on one, they take up the whole horizontal line. So let's undo this. Okay, save the work. And we have the error gone. So Prettier has this check mark, which shows that everything is fine and good. So now, what is Prettier? Prettier is simply a document formatter. You can use it in code editors like Visual Studio Code and Sublime Text and a bunch of whole other code editors. So, like I said, Prettier is also an extension. I want you to understand the concept of extensions. Visual Studio Code can't do everything for you. So, extensions give you that extra ability. So over here, I've installed Prettier. So let me take this back. So it's as simple as that. Prettier is a code formatter, which is just a software tool, while this stuff is the extension for Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have it installed, I want you to go ahead and install it, because aside from it checking for errors, it also helps you format your code. So for instance, now I want you to look at this. If I push this paragraph tag here and I press and I save my work, it automatically pushes it back. You get what I mean? It automatically pushes it back to format our documents. So if you have a fresh install of Visual Studio Code, you won't get this format on save feature. So I want you to head over to the code menu up in the main menu. Then you go to settings and you click on settings. And over here, you search for formats on save. And you can see editor format on save. I clicked on this checkbox. And that is what helped me that whenever I save my work, it is going to format it with a default formatter. Then you need to check this. Then the other one is to formatter. Then you search for formatter. So my default formatter is what? Prettier code formatter. Can you see there are different formatters? There's one for CSS, HTML. All this one comes with Visual Studio Code. So even though you don't install Prettier, Visual Studio Code has cool formatting options for you. But one of the most popular one in the coding ecosystem is Prettier. It's opinionated though, and I really love it. So that is why I'm currently using it. So for your default formatter, you select Prettier. I've done that already. And that is all you need to do. Now, the beauty about Visual Studio Code is that you can also, it also has an alternative. So if you don't want the GUI or you want to see all your whole settings instead of searching, you just click on this icon over here, which is open the settings in JSON. Can you see? Editor format on save true, editor default formatter, Prettier VS Code. Don't worry about this for now. As time goes on, you're going to get a good understanding of this. So if you've done that, let's ride on. Okay, before we continue, I want to talk about more elements, more HTML elements. And if you're curious enough, because the way I'm going to be taking this bootcamp and creating my lessons, I want you to always ask questions. If you notice something is different, or if you are curious, like, why is this way? Write it down. For this bootcamp, I would enjoin you that you have a jotter and a pen to write stuff down as you progress. So one of the questions that I want you to think about, or you might have like asked yourself why, is why we named this file index.html. Why don't we name it home.html or mainpage.html? If you've asked yourself that question, thumbs up to you. So now I'm going to be breaking down why before we cover the remaining HTML elements. And so far, if I don't usually tell people to like my videos, but so far, if you're feeling a spark, like you really like a lot of stuff that you've had are being demystified to you, you know what to do. The button is down there. So let me continue. So now, this file we're currently working on has this strange name called index.html. Why does it have that name? I want you to think about it. Now, let me remove this index.html. Remember what I told you, this is like localhost. It's just like, this file is just like www.facebook.com, then this is a HTML file you're currently seeing. Just imagine this is a HTML file, just like how we have our own HTML file. But right now, you did not see any homepage.html or index.html. Let's try that for us. Let me remove index.html and see what happens. Wow. Our web page still displays, it still loads up the index.html file, just like how we have in this web.facebook.com. Let's try that for the domain name version. Let me remove index.html, click enter. It still works. So you can see it still works. Now, the curious programmer in you, and yes, I can call you a programmer at this point if you've written any code so far. So the curious programmer in you would be like, how does the web server know that it should load up this file as the index.html file? And one way to know would be to rename this file. Let's rename it. Let's say homepage.html. Cool, homepage.html makes sense because this is kind of like our homepage. This is Facebook homepage. This is our homepage, but automatically something happens. It shows us the list of pages in this folder. Now, whenever you host a website, you are kind of like copying this lesson 1 folder to a folder on the internet. And when it's on the internet, it is now accessible to different people around the world. Because right now, this site I'm developing is only accessible to me on my computer. But whenever you host a website, you're actually hosting a folder. Back in the days, we used something called, what is it? FileZilla. FileZilla, yes. And it's used something called FTP, File Transfer Protocol. So we just copy the folder and into the hosting provider, and we have our website on the internet. But now, why is it that it does not show us this homepage.html? I want you to think about it. Okay, let's change this to home. Home. Let's change this to home. Maybe the AI feature in the browser will pick that up. Oops. It does not still load this home.html. Instead, it's showing us the file. So this is kind of like, remember, live server over here kind of like simulates that our website is being hosted, but this time around on the local system. So this is the hosted folder, which is lesson 1. And now it is showing us home.html. Let's click on home. And it now shows us the web page, which is the IP address and the port number, then home.html. But if you're curious enough, and if you have some level of analytical thinking, it's fine if you don't get this at this point, it's cool because you're a beginner. But you should be at this point asking yourself that maybe, just maybe, index.html is kind of like a unique name to tell the web server that this is going to be your main page, or this is going to be your home page, or this is going to be the point of entry of your web application. And that is just the answer. Index.html is kind of like reserved and generally recognized as the file name that will be used as the entry point of your web application. In this case, the web server, when we go to this domain name or this IP address, the web server crawls through the files in our folder, in the lesson 1 folder. It crawls to find index.html, but it doesn't see it, so it just renders the folder. So I want you to look at this and look at our file system. Can you see? It just renders this home.html. It just shows you the list of documents inside here. So index.html, if you go for an interview, probably a couple of months from now, when you've kind of like solidified your web development knowledge, you could be asked basic questions like this for junior developer roles. So you already have the answer. I'm not going to explain it again. I want you to put it in your own words to figure it out. So I'll rename this back to index.html, and I reload, and automatically the web server crawls through the folder, finds this file, and renders it as the main entry point of our web application. All right, enough of networking and hosting of applications, but now you get why this page is named index.html. And one thing I should also point out is that, as you can see, we're using a concept called progressive overload, which is a concept I carried over from the fitness world, which is, as you can see, I'm covering the basics and spending time on the basics, and everything is kind of like slow paced. As we progress further down the weeks, the pace of my instructions and the lesson is going to be increasing in difficulty and going to be increasing in speed. So things are going to get faster as we move on. But these basics are essential. The next thing I want to cover is lists. There are different types of lists in a web page. So let me look for a list. Okay. These are lists, and now let me see this one. This stuff could be lists. Later on, we'll come back to this file to reference this. But there are times in your web page you'd want to display a list of items. This is a common user interface feature. As you can see, just like this in this Visual Studio Code's update page, this is a list of items, kind of like right here we have key highlights. So this is a list of key highlights. So to pull off this user interface in HTML, I'll show you how to do that now. So topics covered, this is a good point to do that. So the first type of list is going to be the unordered list. So unordered list, let me just do that, UL. If I just type in, instead of doing this by myself, I can also just type UL, and emmet over here would help me. So I've typed UL, which stands for unordered list. Then an unordered list can have multiple list items. So topics covered, HTML, LI, then press enter, CSS, another LI, JavaScript. Automatically, you can just see this right now. It's visually mimics this stuff we have over here. So these are called like unordered lists, and unordered lists have bullets. So this small circle you see over here are bullets. So bullet points. So topic covered, UL. Inside the UL, we have LIs. So unordered lists, then list items. The first list item is HTML, second list item is CSS, third list item is JavaScript, As easy as that. I don't want to go further to complicate this. But sometimes you might want to create items that kind of like relate to each other. And as we progress, I'm also going to be talking about accessibility. So, for instance, now you can see HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They are kind of like related. That is why we put them in a list, on ordered list. So for accessibility, which is making your web page accessible to those with stuff like visual impairments, they make use of something called screen readers. So a screen reader right now, when it comes across this part of the web page, it could mention something like topic covered, a list of items, first item, HTML, second item, CSS, third item, JavaScript. If we did not put this in this list right now, it is not going to tell the visually impaired person. It could just come and say topics covered, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. This is not really going to be an accessible approach, because throughout this bootcamp, I'm going to be putting accessibility in mind so that whichever application you develop would be accessible to those who are visually impaired. That's kind of like those with disabilities. Maybe they could not see well, or they could be colorblind or stuff like that. So they make use of screen readers. So automatically putting this in a list item, you've kind of like told or let them know that this is a list item and it is going to be called one after another. Now, you already have this. And list items are not just limited to bullet points. For example, stuffs like this could also be a list, even though you don't have the bullets here. You could remove it using CSS, which we'll be talking about in week 2. Now, also, this stuff could also be a list, even though they appear side by side and they are styled differently. CSS is going to be responsible for doing all the whole magic of the styling to make your page look more visually appealing. So this is unordered list. Now, the second type of list is ordered list. So UL, unordered list. The second one would be OL, ordered list. Inside ordered list, we have the same thing, list item, week 1. Now see the difference. Can you see? Ordered lists have numerical values to depict the sequence. So over here, just because we have OL, we have 1, the second list item 2, the third list item 3. I don't want to spend time on this because we'll be making use of this when we start designing user interfaces. But you get the idea. You get the idea of the nesting. The list items won't display this if the parent is not either a UL or an OL. The next one I'm going to be talking about is symbols. Let's see. Let's say you have, you have paragraph. You see one, maybe you kind of like, you want to create a math application or something like that, and you want to use the symbol less than. So you say 1 is less than 5. Now, the programmer in you would notice that this turned red. So we are likely going to have a problem. So let's save this. And now, when we saved it, you can see no problem, right? But not so fast. Remember, if you look at this whole HTML file, the HTML markup language, and the hypertext markup language, which is HTML, you can see there are some reserved symbols like this less than and greater than sign, or you can call it left-angled brackets and right-angled brackets. You can see over here now, we have 1 is less than 5. And we're making use of this opening, the left-angled brace, which is used for the opening tags and also for the closing tags. Now, normally, I was expecting an error, but I did not get an error since 1 is less than 5, right? But now, what about if you want to make 5 to be bold, just like how we did for this part? If you scroll up and want to make 1 to be bold using the strong tag or the strong element, watch and see what happens. When I do this, STRON, I want to close the strong tag. Closed it. Now, opened it, Now I want to create the closing strong tag. Can you see? Automatically, Emmet is confused because it sees this opening square brace, and when I try to close it, it automatically swapped it to a paragraph tag. Meanwhile, I did not want a paragraph. Let me save this. Can you see? I did not want the paragraph. Meanwhile, I wanted the strong tag. And you can see Prettier already complains. And question time, why is Prettier complaining? If you said that you have two closing paragraph tags, you're correct, because paragraphs can be nested. So now, to avoid this type of markup error or markup difficulty, although I can just come here and change this to strong and everything works fine. But this is not really the legit way to actually tackle such. So the folks that created the HTML markup language and always develop on the HTML standard said that, okay, there are going to be instances where your web page is going to contain the less than and greater than signs. These are going to be special characters or special symbols reserved for HTML. So we don't want you to always put your HTML markup like this. Rather, you're going to be using sets of symbols to represent less than and greater than. And for the one for less than, to start special symbols, you use the ampersand sign, then you now type LT, then you also end it with the semicolon. Can you see, whenever you type the ampersand sign, Visual Studio shows you a list of reserved symbols that you shouldn't directly put inside your HTML markup. Instead, you should use the alternative, just like delta. LT stands for less than, RT for greater than, and so on and so forth. I'll leave you to play around with this. This one also stands for, I think, probably latitude, but I'll leave you to play around with this. So the alternative HTML symbol for the less than sign is ampersand LT then semicolon. This semicolon is kind of like used to delimit this whole expression, kind of like to end it, like this is the start, this is the end. Then every other thing should be plain HTML. So when I save this work, nothing changes. So this is replaced with the less than in our web page. So right now I can easily wrap 5 with strong and I won't have that problem again. Push 5 here, save my work, and I won't have the problem again. So these are special symbols for HTML that you can use when you want to use specific symbols like less than, greater than. I can easily do the greater than one. So I can say 5, 1. So 5 is GT. Cool. Can you see the symbol? Greater than 1. So that is special symbols for you in HTML. And the reason I'm covering all this stuff step by step is when we get to designing with CSS, I'm not going to be, sometimes I might just provide you with the HTML markup, then we dive right in styling the website. Or when I'm coding up user interfaces, I'm not going to be covering all this stuff step by step. So now that I'm doing all these things, you should try to kind of like go through this stuff and make sure you understand what I'm doing. Because like I mentioned, as we go over the weeks, stuffs are going to get pretty serious and fast paced. Cool. Now, the final topic we're going to be covering for lesson 1 for today is going to be links and multi-page websites. So right now, we only have one page in our website. So I can link to another page in our website. And let me create the other page. About us. Let me create about us. About us. You can put it underscore us, whichever one you want. So about us.html. And exclamation mark, enter. Remember, we've covered all these things. Now, the first thing I want to change in the About Us page, let me close up let me close up this page. Okay, the first thing I'm going to change over here is the title. Remember, the title is what is going to appear at the top in the browser. So I'm going to change this to About Us. Then in the body, I'm going to say H1 I can use H2, but H1 means the most prominent stuff. So I'll say about us. Then underneath this, I'll put a paragraph and say, oh, we have the About Us page. So right now, we are in the index.html page. Let us create a link to the About Us page. So creating links in HTML is quite simple. So we'll make use of the anchor tag, the A tag, the anchor tag. So I'm going to say A, and immediately I press A, I can just press, the Emmet abbreviation comes up, I can press enter, or I could do this manually if I want. It's still the same thing. So I could come here and say A, close this, then href, then the link to the file. So over here, I'm going to link to About Us. Now, as with if you don't want to know how things work, like you don't want to have a solid understanding of HTML, I don't think this bootcamp is for you. Like you could do a crash course bootcamp, but I just like to play around with the inner workings of stuff. So to kind of like make my students have solid knowledge of things. So now I'm going to say About Us. I'll save it. About Us comes up, right? If I click it, nothing happens because I've not added a link. So now, href, A means anchor tag. You know anchor. Remember I told you Visual Studio Code, just hover. If the A element has an href attribute, then it represents a hyperlink, a hypertext anchor labeled by its content. Cool. So the href is just kind of like a link to the file, or a link to the web page, or a link to the website, or something like that. So over here, I can link to the About Us page, and let's open up the About Us page. Let me see. We already have the About Us page. Let me drag it into a new file. Can you see we have the About Us page? We are the coolest place to learn web development on the web. So let me grab this link and put it here because it's going to link us to the page, and save our work. Then I believe it's saved. Okay. Then let's click on, I hope this is self-explanatory. Okay, let me just, you see over here, we have the A tag, then we also have the href. The href is the attribute, which is going to be the link. Let me hover. Contains the URL. Do you understand? Then inside here, we have the content, which is going to be the link text. Then we also now close the anchor elements. Cool. So let's test this out. I come over here and I press. What happened? It's not linking to the About Us page, but this is the link. Why is it not linking to the About Us page? So whenever something like this happens in your development journey, you can see over here, Prettier doesn't give us an error. If you look down here, there is no error from Prettier. We are linking to this file, users, flipgig, blah, 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 aboutus.html. If we copy this file, if I copy it and paste it in my browser, which is this, and I press enter, it gives us this file. But over here, we don't get to navigate to that file. Now, whenever you encounter something like this, you're trying to do an action. Like if I hover, you can see at the bottom left corner, it shows us the link to that file, which is the About Us file. Now, if you encounter stuffs like this is where something like the developer tools comes in. This is called debugging in the whole programming sphere. Debugging is trying to kind of like narrow through your code, to navigate through your code and the logic and the system to see what could be causing an error or a problem or a malfunction. So currently now, everything logically should work. But when it doesn't work, you've checked your browser and you've checked your your code editor, no problem, Prettier, good, Mac, everything is nice. You checked your browser, everything seems cool. The last place or the next place to check, since this is front-end development and we are not running anything on the command line, would be to check your developer tools. So you right-click, go to Inspect, And automatically, if you look here, you can see this 9 with the X mark. So you can see that there's a problem here. There's a problem here. So when you see this kind of thing, you can click it and it opens up the console, but I'll just click the console directly here. So you can see, not allowed to load, let me zoom in, not allowed to load local resource. So if I open this up, can I open it up? And you see, it said not allowed. Let me refresh and click. Okay. Not allowed to look. The reason it wrote 9 previously was I clicked this link 9 times. But now it's saying not allowed to load local resource. File, flip gig, blah, 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 blah. This is an error. And automatically, this should give you a hint. The file we are trying to access is the About Us page, which is on our local system. And this is a security risk. Let me check one more place, the network tab. Okay. Don't be intimidated by this. It's not a big deal. You get to understand all this later. Understand this error. You see, there's even an AI. There's an AI in the browser. I don't want to. No, I'm not signing in. Thank you. Okay. So now it's saying not allowed to load local resource. Remember what I told you about live server? This kind of like simulates our website or our web app is hosted on the internet, but this time around it is hosted on our local system. So looking at this is already a security threat. Imagine someone, you develop this web app and you host it on flipgeekbootcamp.com. Imagine this URL is flipgeekbootcamp.com. And now, you now click About Us, which is going to link to my own personal computer. Are you understanding? This is just like flipgeekbootcamp.com or webdevbootcamp.com. And this About Us link is linking to a specific file on my own personal computer. Just thinking about it with common sense, it's kind of like a security risk. Because why would I allow someone from somewhere I don't know? The user could be in Brazil, it could be in Sweden. Why should I give that user access to a local file on my computer? Number one, this is a security threat. This shouldn't be done. You understand? If you have a website, all the whole resource should be hosted on the web server. And remember, when you host it on the web server on the internet, that web server is going to you're going to have all the whole files there, and that web server is going to be secured. You understand? It's going to check the user's request, it's going to check the user's IP, check whether the user, and it is going to only respond to the user with valid files and documents it has. I don't know if you remember the slide, the request response cycle I told you about. The request response cycle I told you about from the slide. So the server is only going to respond with the file it has access to. Currently now, this server running on live server does not have access to our local, to aboutus.html on our local file system. Instead, it only has access to the About Us hosted on the live server. So that is why we have this error, because the reason I'm pointing this out is because a lot of beginners, they make this type of mistake. You get what I mean? Now you're accessing a file and not a web page hosted on the web server. So this is a common beginner mistake. That is why I'm pointing it out. Also, the nesting of block elements like paragraph and H1 is also a beginner mistake. That is why I'm also pointing it out. It's one thing to learn this stuff, and it's also one thing to know the potential mistakes and also help you to develop the thinking around how to solve this and why this happens. So now, to solve this, I'm not going to be giving us the aboutus.html file on our local system version. Instead, I'm going to be giving the aboutus.html file on the hosted local server. So right now, I'm going to be, okay, right now, this is also called absolute part, but let me not talk about it. So I'm going to remove this and just say about us.html. So right now, in the web server, when I click this link, it should take us to, look at the bottom left corner of the browser. It should take us to the IP address /aboutus.html. And if you look at this server, remember what I told you. On live server, it looks like lesson 1 is a folder hosted on the internet. So when you look at aboutus.html, it is also going to be in the same hierarchy. Both of them are going to be like siblings. So this should probably work. Let's see. I click on it and voila, it works. So it takes us to the aboutus.html version, which is corresponding to the one on our local server. Hope that makes sense. So that is just basic linking, and this is called a relative path. So it is going to be looking at where is index.html contained. Index.html is contained at the root folder of our hosted web app. Can you see? It is contained in this lesson 1, which is hosted here. Now, this is called relative path. So if I'm linking to about us, it is going to look for where index.html is contained, then find the aboutus.html file. We can also put a /. Can you see? If you put a /, automatically it checks the current directory, and you can see the 2 files in the current directory. And I can select aboutus.html. So I'll save this again, refresh and click, and it works again. So let me just put one more text here. Let me put one more link. I can just put /, or I can put /index.html. But when we say /, remember what I told you. The web server, / is just going to be everything in the web server, then /. And you know, if we remove aboutus.html, it is automatically going to give us index.html. So I'm just going to only put / here. It's still the same. I'll say go back. If I click it, it takes us back home. Can you see? This is kind of like a multi-page website. Let me just put different variations. I can also say index.html, and I can also say index.html, and 3 of them would work. So if I go to about us, the first one works, the second one works, and the third one works. So whenever you see any type of stuffs like this, you already know what happens. So I'll comment this out by hitting command and /. So I think that is it for this, but there's one HTML tag I forgot to mention, and that is the image HTML tag. So I'm going to copy an image right now to our working folder. The first thing I'm going to do would be to create the images folder. So over here, I'll create a new folder, images, then I'll copy an image into it. Okay, then that's just the final thing. You can see the image over here. This is the food image. So to display an image, we're going to be using an image tag. Let me put it in the About Us page because I think that'll be cool. So for the image tag, so far we've been using HTML tags and elements, HTML elements that have content inside them. Okay, the link tag also has content inside it. When I mean content, I mean in between the opening and closing tag. But the image tag is quite different, and let's take a look at it. So when I type img, which stands for image, all the stuffs are called semantic HTML. Semantic HTML simply means from the element or tag, from the tag name, you can describe what that element does. So img simply means image. P simply means paragraph. H1 simply means the biggest heading. Body simply means the body of the web page. Title, you see, and on and on and on. These are called semantic HTML, which means descriptive HTML. So you can easily derive the meaning You understand? You can easily derive the meaning from the tag name. So for the source, the first thing I'm going to add, okay, I'm still going to come back to links, but the source, the first thing I'm going to add will be, like we do, you just do /. So Visual Studio Code will help you with the directory. Images, food one. This is it. So relative, it is going to be relative to where this about us is located. So when I type /, it's going to go to the root or the current working directory, which is going to be lesson 1. Then it goes into images, food, image.h. So if I move this about us into a different folder, this link is not going to work. And I'll explain why, but let me just write on. So we have the link to the images, to the food image 1.jpg. And we also have alt. What does this alt mean? Let's hover. This attribute defines an alternative text description of the image. Now, sometimes you might be using a browser that is non-graphical, or remember what I talked about accessibility and visually impaired people. Someone that is partially blind might not be able to see the user interface, and they might not be able to see the image. So remember what I also said about screen readers. Screen reader is going to kind of like be reciting what is on the web page about us. We are the coolest place to learn web development on the web. A link with the text, go back. Now, for the image, we also have an alternate text for that screen reader for visually impaired people. So I can say an image of a food image, a food image, and save it. So we have the image over here, and let's see. There are some times that you might be using a screen reader or the internet, or you might be pointing to the wrong image. For instance, if I change this food image, that's 1, it means that, and now if you check the images folder, food image.jpg does not exist, but food image -1.jpg exists. So if I save this work, can you see? Automatically, if it doesn't, you can see the image is broken. If we zoom in, the image is broken. That's how Chrome represents a broken image. That means that image failed to load. You can see what happens. The alternate text is displayed. You can see a food image. Does that make sense? So there are a couple of reasons. Number one, for screen readers, for accessibility, so that the screen reader will be able to recite what is on that image, in this case, a food image. Number two, just in case the image is broken or you've changed the location of the image on the web server, it is going to detect, or you are going to be able to see what is there. Just like now, the image is not there, I'm pointing to the wrong one, but I can know that, okay, what was actually meant to be here was an image of a food. Does that make sense? Cool. Now, one thing I want you to also notice is this go back button. You can see it displayed by the side. So images and link elements, there's the href elements, are inline elements. You understand? So they don't take up the whole line, just like how we had for, let me go back, just like how we had for strong elements that we nested them inside here. Remember what I told you about paragraphs? Paragraphs take up the whole line, but you can see this anchor tag does not take up the whole line. That is why it is placed side by side. So to take it to the next line, I can simply wrap it inside a paragraph tag, and remember, you can see automatically it goes to the next line. Hope that makes sense. Now, there's something I missed about, this is going to be the final point. There's something I missed about links. I made mention about this about us being a relative link. That means it is relative to where this index.html is. So now, in case we move around this index.html or about.html somewhere, maybe we create a folder named pages and we put them inside there, what is going to happen is the link is going to break. I'll leave you to try that out by yourself. But the link is going to break. So this is called a relative path. That means in relation to where this document is. But now there's something called an absolute path. So an absolute path is going to contain the full URL. So I'm going to copy this URL and paste it over here and save my work. And now it is going to be linking to aboutus.html with the absolute path of this document. So if I save this, this is the second one. If I save this, it's already saved by default thanks to Live Server. And I click on this and it still links us back. So this is relative, this is absolute. So if I move around index.html to any path or any folder, whenever I go to this link, it is just going to go to the full web address. Sometimes relative paths are necessary and sometimes absolute paths are necessary. A good example of absolute path would be if I want to go to Facebook. So I could just duplicate this and say, you see links, like I said, these are inline elements. That's why they are appearing side by side. They are not block elements like paragraph. So if I save this and I click follow us on Facebook, voila, it takes us to Facebook. But this is not what we want. We don't want to lose, whenever we are linking to external sites or some type of documents, we don't want to lose our website. Like right now, Facebook has replaced our website in the URL. You get, I have to go back to our website. So sometimes we may want to open in a new tab. And this is a common feature. So for that, we use the target attributes and say blank. There are different options. Can you see the different options? Parent, self, top. I'll leave you to try out all this. But target blank means open on a new tab. So when I save this and I come over here, watch what happens. It opens on a new tab. We still have our web page, but this time around, Facebook is opened on a new tab. So this is absolute URL. This is relative URL. And now you might be asking yourself, I can see HTTP, HTTPS. Not to worry, as we progress, I'll leave that to you. Let that be a take-home assignment. What's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? And also, another assignment for you would be to check the meaning of HTTP. I'm going to cover that in the next lesson, but you have stuff to do. Check the full meaning of HTTP and what's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. That will get you interactive on this one. So I believe I've covered everything for today's lesson. And the original plan was for the demo session to be 1 hour to 2 hours. I think I wrote 1 hour, 30 minutes on the slide. So a brief summary of what we've done is we currently worked on HTML today. We covered common HTML elements and we also covered linking to different parts of the website and also linking to external sites. You learned about different HTML tags like the H1 tag, and you learned that a particular tag can have attributes and also content, and together you call them an element. So this is a anchor tag, or anchor opening tag, anchor closing tag, content, and it can also have attributes. All together you call them an element. You also learned how to display images using the image elements, and you also learned about source and the alt attributes. You also learned about the heads portion of the HTML document and some of the meaning and what they actually do. That would be it for this lesson, and you'll get an assignment in the next lesson. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.